Welcome to the Alain Elkann interviews, an unprecedented window into the minds of some of the most well-known and respected figures of the last 25 years.
Before we begin, we would like to inform our listeners that today's conversation is conducted in Italian. For those who may wish to follow the discussion in English, an edited transcript is available at alainelkanninterviews.com.
Altogether about 22 years.
You are originally Italian, from Turin. You studied in Switzerland. You lived in the United States. You worked in many countries. Why Athens?
Mostly because of encounters. Greece became a place of magic when I first came. I was 19. I had finished 8 years of boarding school on a Swiss mountain. And my first vacation was in Crete. And I had an awakening, a sudden love for a land, for a country, for the light, for everything that this place stood for. But not necessarily for the antiques, but literally I love the regular life, the normal life of Greeks at the time. It was not an easy time because it was 1968, I think, the summer, 68 or 69, I don't remember. So there were the colonels, there was a military junta. Many of my friends thought that I was not correct to go in a country where there was a junta, but I saw the things in a possibly more apologetic way for myself. I thought, well, I can go and I can bring books and I can bring records for adventure for the time, but that was not the case. I was literally in Crete, living with shepherds and sailors whose main concern was the survival, definitely not liking the colonels. Crete is historically a left-wing part of Greece. What they asked me to bring were records of Theodorakis, whose music I literally adored.
Were you speaking Greek?
I knew a little Greek, just a little, not large amounts, but people were extraordinarily hospitable and therefore incredibly friendly to whomever was trying to speak their language.
And is it in Greece that you felt, you understood that you were going to be an artist, or?
No, that I knew before. That I knew from the age of 12. I was in boarding school. I just arrived. I learned two basic things the first 2 weeks of boarding school. The second was that I wanted to be an artist or paint. Didn't really put it in as clearly as want to be an artist, but our drawing teacher, who just passed away, with whom I was in contact throughout the years, came to class. He had asked us to bring a box of Carandache gouache, 2 paintbrushes, pencils. The third lesson we had, he took out a book and said, take a dictation. And he read us a paragraph in which Tonio Kröger, on a beach in the Northern Sea, in the distance sees the 2 loves of his life, Hans and Inge Holm, came together to kiss. And then he said, please illustrate it. And I thought that was the most wonderful thing on earth. And I decided then and there that that's what I wanted to do forever. Lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 is a slightly different lesson. I had just arrived with a funicular to the boarding school, accompanied by a teacher who picked us up at the train station in Milan to bring us over to Zug. And I was there with another young man from Torino with whom we made great friends all my life, who also is a painter, curious. He also had the same teacher. But somebody, a grown-up, overheard us speak Italian. And I have no idea of the age. He was a grown-up. It could have been from 20 to 60. When you're 10 or 11 or 12, a grown-up is a very wide scope definition. So he asked us, because he overheard us speak Italian, if he knew if there was a job at the end of a funicular. And I said, I don't know. I'm new. I'm going to school. And my friend, who had been there for 1 year, before, he said, okay, don't worry, the director will come to meet us and I'll ask him if there is a job. So the director waits for us. We arrive at the train station of the funicular and we ask immediately, there is this man called Lamberto. Would you have a job for him? And the director said, okay, be patient, we'll see, and et cetera, et cetera. To make a long story short, I was shown to my room and 2 weeks later in the courtyard of a school, I see Lamberto who obviously had a job as a dishwasher, and he was having a sandwich. He was eating a sandwich, and I said, "Buongiorno, Lamberto." He said, "Buongiorno." And I looked at his sandwich, I said, "What are you eating?" And he said, "I have 2 slices of black bread and inside a slice of white bread, because I never had white bread in my life." And then and there I understood that the others existed. So these 2 lessons came coincidentally at the same time and somehow formed me. And then, I had no idea of Greece until I was 18. I had no idea. I mean, I had read the Iliad and the Odyssey because they're part of a curriculum, Italian curriculum. And one of the Italian poets was actually Greek, who wrote in Italian, Ugo Foscolo.
When did you decide to establish yourself in Athens? In other words, as you said, you were an artist, and Athens was not exactly the center, and you had been before in New York in the very hot years of the pop art and all that. You had been in many other countries. Athens is a beautiful place, and Greece, but it's a bit far away from the madding crowd, I mean, somehow.
Well, the story is more complicated. I kept on going to Greece. The next year, I went to see other islands and yet another island. And in February of 1972, I was at the University of Rome studying English literature and foreign literatures, including modern Greek literature. I went to a concert by Theodorakis. The concert was literally amazingly beautiful and fabulous. Everybody was rooting for him. He was in exile. He was defending democracy in Greece. But the line in front of me, slightly one seat on the right of the person in front of me, there was a young woman, and I understood that if I didn't meet her, I would never know happiness my whole life. So I am rather shy, but I don't know how I managed to meet her. And we began talking, becoming very good friends. And to make a long story short, she lived in the United States. So I tried to invite her to come to Greece, and then in a house I had rented in an island in Paros in 1973. She had very serious problems, and she had been institutionalized in a hospital. So I decided that I had to be close to where she was, which was in Connecticut, and I applied to a scholarship which introduced me to a fellowship called Harkness. And I did receive a Harkness fellowship, and I went, spent 1 year at Yale, and she was nearby in a hospital in Middletown, Connecticut. And we saw each other 3 or 4 times, and then I lost her, and the whole world lost her, and she disappeared. So I didn't know how to reach her. And at that point, when my fellowship finished, there was an agreement that one would leave the United States for 2 years and go back to his own country or her own country. And I decided to go to Greece instead, because we used to read, and I think that's what bound us together forever. We used to read Seferis together in Rome.
The poet.
George Seferis. We used to get ourselves with the little train to Ostia in February, March, and look for a free beach and read George Seferis. So I decided that if I was not going to be with her, I would be at least in a place where we both wanted to go and where I could read Seferis with Greece all around my world. So that's how I ended up in Greece in 1977.
You talk about Seferis, you talked before about Ugo Foscolo. Poetry was very important in your life, no? And somehow, even if you are an artist, you are also a poet, right? You became a poet yourself.
Let's say I was loaned from the art world to the world of words. I did write poetry, and I do write poetry. I do write also very short proses. I think throughout the period of high school, I was quite undecided whether I was going to be a painter or a writer. But in fact, I tend to see things in images, and poetry worked out incredibly well because imagery is extraordinarily important for poetry.
So some of your works, or many of your works, are poems painting poems. I mean, yes. You paint poems.
Yes, I do. I take some of the poems I wrote, and in 1977, when I moved to Greece, I started transcribing some of the poems that I had written in what looked to me like very large works, made of pencil drawings, made with literally, each piece had from 800,000 to maybe 1,200,000 dots. And in these dots, because of condensation of the dots, even more, and one could read a poem. And they were written as if they were written in sand or in the fog, that as if gusts of wind could erase them. So I like very much this idea. They were ephemeral. They were in 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 or 9 even sheets of paper, which made them look fragmentary, like fragments, like what you would find in epigraphs, literally light gray on white. And they ranged in dimension from 1 meter by 1.40 meters to the largest one I made, which was 1.50 meters by 2.50 meters. They were very meditative work, just execution, because I made 4 or 5 dots, then I sharpened the pencil, and I made another 4 or 5 dots. And so the gesture was repeated for months, the same gestures. And in the meantime, under my table, the shavings of the pencils grew higher and higher. And these were the first poems.
It is peculiar, the fact that you are Italian, you studied in Swiss, Germany, you live in Greece, and you write in English. Why do you write in English? And not in Greek, for instance, or in Italian.
I didn't speak Greek that well, but the first batch of poems were written at the same time in English and Italian. I would only write things that would have similar sonorities and a similar rhythm. They were written in Italian because my mother tongue is Italian, and in English because I was living my sentimental life in English. And then afterwards, I kept on writing more and more just in English, hardly in Italian.
Why? Because you find English better language for poetry, or
yes and no.
You express better your feelings in English?
Yes and no. Can I give you an example? Gosh, I have the English version here and the Turkish version. One verse of a poem. In passion, our eyes become nostrils, our hips sway, and the spirit squanders. In passione, I nostri occhi diventano froge, that's the word for the nostrils of animals, of horses. I fianchi oscillano e lo spirito sperpera. In English, the spirit squanders comes almost as close to the beauty of Italian, where lo spirito sperpera. But other things are easier in English.
How do you compose your poems? Because you seem to be very good in languages and words. Do you suddenly write a poem? Or?
Sort of. I think all of them in my mind. I hardly take notes. And until it perfectly flows in my mind, they're rather short, I write it down. For the long ones, I might take a few notes. Crucial in whatever I write is to give a sense of time and of space. The first person does not exist, but the eventual characters that are in the poem or their voice is given always a time and a space. Another example. Then when I thought my shadow was handsome, he came dancing, but not to say. I've never said beautiful words, yet we both know the performances of John the Baptist. This is a poem about someone announcing, but it begins with then when. In Italian would be quando quell'ora. Pensai alla mia ombra essere bella, venne egli danzando, ma non per restare. So I fixed it in a time, which is abstract, but still a time nonetheless. Other examples?
There is music in your world. Are you very much influenced by music?
I'm influenced in spirit by music, and literally by Greek music, because Greek music has an incredible marriage with poetry. Poems by Seferis were put to music. One of the great Greek poets, contemporary, or at least at the end of last century, Nikos Gatsos, wrote one book of poetry and 50 of the most beautiful songs ever. And he thought that the idea that it would be hummed, it would be very popular, it would be almost like a folk art, was very important for the language. Let me give you maybe a reason why I think poetry is very important, and language is very important, and it's very connected with painting, regardless whether I make a painting of a poem or not. I think it was Kenneth Koch, extraordinary poet, American poet from the 70s, who said that poetry is image and song. And I'm going to give you an example of a very short poem, again, in which space and time is indicated very clearly. I'll say it in English. At night, the blind women of Athens mend clothes and speak of angels. La notte, le cieche di Atene rammendano e parlano di angeli. There is an indication of a night, indication of a location. There's no more than 10 words, but all this is indicated to give it a framework, a very clear framework. And then it's an image. It's an image of maybe complicity, solidarity. You can imagine the women whispering. And it is something that can only be said in poetry. Simply because if you're blind, you cannot mend clothes.
It cannot be made into a painting?
It has been made into a painting. The English version has been turned into a painting.
So you wrote the poem
Yeah.
With your own craft?
Yeah, I wrote the poem. It's a watercolor.
Your craft is made of very precise, very specific work. I mean, one recognizes your work because it's quite unique. This is important, I think, for an artist, not to be recognized, to have your own, to say, this is a Giacometti because it's like this, right. This is a Colombo. You're very specific in your craft. And it takes, some artists work very fast and they do many, many works. You're very meticulous and it takes a long time to do your work.
Yeah.
So how does it work, this connection between writing your poems and doing your work?
Well, this poem specifically, At Night, the Blind Women of Athens, was painted as if it were a huge embroidery in which the canvas with I think you said the weft and the vertical lines of the canvas and the horizontal lines of the canvas, we should look it up, is painted. And upon it, the letters that compose the poem are painted as if it were an embroidery. So it looks like it takes ages to make, and it does. But the whole point is that the issue of time is embedded in the painting, and I think the viewer should see it. Can I give you another example? It's the shortest and the most austere poem I've ever written. It's 4 words, and it's, I think, 14 letters. Maybe 13. And you have to imagine a dark night through that you can see an organdy, a tulle fabric, black tulle fabric, and behind there is this dark night with some yellow reflexes on what could be the sky and the sea. And it has 4 words, one of each corner: top left corner, top right corner, bottom left corner, bottom right corner. The words are wax, wane, ebb, neap. Wax, wane are the phases of the moon. Ebb, neap are the phases of the tides. And so when you read that, which is written as an embroidery over the tulle, you understand that behind it there is a dark night and a dark sea. And as a poem, it can be remembered by everyone. It doesn't take much to remember 4 words, but it encompasses 28 days and 6 hours, the time of a moon, or phases of a moon, of a tide.
It's a very intellectual work, But the result is, I mean, people do have to understand all this. The poem is more a feeling. And what is the difference between a poem that is written on a book or piece of paper and the poem that becomes an artwork?
This one is clearly just an artwork, because there's no way in paper to have the distances that gives you the space, the silence between wax, wane, and ebb, neap. But anybody can understand. Everybody knows that this is about the moon, it's about the tide. It's not really intellectual. What I love as an artist, that it probably took me, I don't know, 3 months to make this painting. Thread by thread that was painted and thread by thread that was embroidered. And it can be consumed in 3 seconds. And that gives me an infinite joy to know that time can be compressed in the utmost way. And at the same time that the economy of means is total and absolute, because I'm describing the night and the sea in a drawing with, that's a wax wane is 7 and ebony another with 14 letters. And how to describe the night in 14 letters. And it took me many, many nights, but it can be consumed in 3-4 seconds, is what gives me infinite joy about making art.
Do you think that in all this work of art, I mean poetry or the way you paint, there are also numbers, mathematics? You think that in the composition of a work or of a poem, numbers, mathematics are involved, or it just it comes out like this?
It comes out like this. All of these poems or painting are made while I make another painting, as it takes me about from 1.5 months to 3 months to do a painting. While I do it, while I paint, I think of 4 or 5 other paintings in my mind that slowly they get edited, and maybe only one stays. But the editing is strictly in the mind. It deals with imagination, literally, with the image and possibly a musicality, song.
So everything is in your head.
Yes.
And then
there's no sketches.
When it's finished, you do it.
Yeah.
So you don't take notes.
No, there's no sketches, there's no notes, there's no manuscripts, there's there's maybe 10 sheets of manuscripts for the longer poems. But
even for your short stories, I mean, short stories that you're writing, I mean, you said you're also writing in prose.
Yes, no, there are short stories about characters in Greece. And again, Greece is very important for me, and it's my world, by all means. And those I might write and correct and edit. There might be a sheet of paper with a few corrections. But they're going to become, again, paintings, but in a different form, no longer the dots and the threads and the fabric. They're going to be like mosaics, huge written mosaics. A bit complicated to explain. But
you're going to put them into paintings?
Yes.
The story?
Paintings. They're becoming, one is particularly long to become a painting. And that will take me probably 4 or 5 months.
To do it?
Yes.
Can you read it?
Yes.
Okay.
It's called Maro Capetanacci, and it's actually the real name of a real person. It was the season when cats play in the gardens. They met at the telephone station. In 1969, it was a place where to make or receive a telephone call in Ierapetra. Just out of school, Maro had a summer job with her friend Calliope, connecting telephones through an intricate system of wires and jacks. The young man was to enter university in the fall. There was a gentle flair between them. Not knowing each other's language, pointing to a calendar, they arranged to have a lunch together the following Sunday. They met at a tavern close to the sea, with turquoise lacquer wainscoting in a lighter opaque coat to the ceiling. They were 2 of 6 clients. She ordered a white fish soup, made boiling a bright red scorpion fish. Local music was coming from a gramophone and accompanied their lunch. Maro wore a green cotton jumper with 2 straps over her shoulders. After their lunch, sensing that the young man was a foreigner, the owner switched the music to a slow French song. The young man invited Maro to dance. They got up, and for the first time, their hands touched their naked arms. After a few notes, she let go of his hand and went to the table. There, she found a deodorant stick in her purse and rubbed it under her arms. He fell in love. They didn't speak each other's language. They spent the afternoon saying "ah" in long sighs. He did not know then what she had always known. In her mother tongue, the root of the word elegy is ligain, that is to say, ah, ah. For Maro, it was an elegy in the afternoon. He walked her home, slightly inebriated from the touch of Maro's arms. She lived in a white single-family home with a column on which rested a trellis. They exchanged addresses. Months later, the young man received a postcard with a view of Ierapetra. On it was written Chiritismus, greetings. He responded with an equally terse and loving text. He mailed it from the post office at the Vatican, in part for reliability and in part for the beautiful stamps. He treasured Maro's postcard for months until she began to fail from his memory. In Ierapetra, Maro slipped the young man's postcard into a book, precisely in the pages where it said, "Not as she is, but was when hope shone bright. Not as she is, but as she feels his dream."
It's very nice. It's more descriptive.
Yeah.
Then it's less abstract than the poems, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a story.
That's why
which you write in a very, with your style, which is a very simple, not exactly the word, but in a very, don't use too many words to describe a scene, but the story is very clear, right? So you enjoy doing this now, to write this short.
And that's why it will become a mosaic, because it is a prose. So it will need the solidity, the look of a solidity of a mosaic, even though it's going to be a watercolor that looks like a mosaic.
How can you do? It takes so many months.
It takes 5 or 6 months.
But you don't have the need to write other stories.
I will think of other stories when I paint, because when I paint 8-9 hours per day.
It's a lot. 8-9 hours per day for 5 months.
Yeah, I'll take a day off.
You take a day off?
I will take a day off for sure. But other days are going to be even longer, because when I'm staying at my studio, I wake up in the morning and I go to my desk, and sometimes I work for hours and hours and don't even notice. But yeah, when I paint, I'm going to be thinking about the stories which I'm going to be writing,
But there is something left of Italy in your work. This is for, comparatively to literature, there are writers like James Joyce, but that's different. He lives abroad and he only writes about Dublin, his native city, but he never lives there, or he spends most of his life in other places. You spent most of your life outside your own country, right, or your own language. Even if you're far away, you don't talk about Italy, you talk about Greece.
Yes, I have to say, I mean, I'm certainly informed by Italy being my mother tongue, and certainly informed by Italian painters. Probably among my very favorite painters are 2 Italian painters who were born in Greece. In fact, one could almost say they're Greek painters because they're so unusual for Italian painting. And it's Giorgio de Chirico and his brother Alberto Savinio. And I think this connection Italy-Greece is very important in the sense that Greece was a moment of memory for Giorgio de Chirico. And his work is about memory. The little train is in back of his paintings, the train that his father built in Volos. He built actually the first train and train track in Greece. The books by the Savinio, L'infanzia di Nivaso Dolcemare, The Childhood of Nivaso Dolcemare, are about his childhood in Athens. So strangely, I did the opposite. I left Italy to come to Greece. But my mother tongue has certainly informed the way I write English, has informed probably my spacing in the stanzas of poetry. Yes, I think somewhere along the way we're totally imprinted by the nursery rhymes we heard.
But you live next to the Parthenon.
Yes.
Which you see from your terrace every morning or night, whatever.
And rooms.
From your bed, from your room.
From the shower, from everything.
And did Greece, since you came age 18 in Crete the first time, did it change?
Yes.
Over the years? Did it change your feelings about Greece?
No, Greece has changed, but has not changed my feelings. It's been an incredible port where to arrive. Let's say my adolescence was changing room and roommate every year, every 6 months. So it was a table, a bed, and a chair, and a bookshelf, changing regularly. So I think when I came here, I had that extraordinary feeling that, by the way, Seferis talks about, which is waking up in a small port that you've never been. And the shutters are so close because it's dawn. But there's a sense of security. There's a sense of rest, of peace. And this is where probably what I found in this country, and I've always loved it. Even though it has changed, the world changes. So we everything can be considered worse than before if you like the traditions and things. But I still love being here, and I love the language, I love the music, I love the dances, I love the popular culture of Greece. I love a museum like the Benaki Museum, where high classical art goes along with beautiful icons and embroideries and costumes and little shoes and popular dishes on the wall. And it's a museum of Greek culture, but it's a museum in which high art and popular art are mixed, and they're considered at the same value.
The way you talk makes me think that, after all, this is a love story, basically. Not many people live inside a love story, right? I mean, not many people went to live, who knows, in New York or in other countries. Some have nostalgia of countries that they were obliged to leave, right, because of revolutions or because of events, political events, and they were obliged to go somewhere else. You are self-exiled in this country, but you're not exiled. I mean, I have the feeling from what you say, your poems, your short stories, your painting, your colors, that this is your love story and that you live inside this love story.
I certainly love this country, and it is a love story across the board. But what can I say? I have turtle doves, tortorelle, coming to my terrace, waking me up every morning. One of the things of the South is that there's less sparrows and more turtle doves. And it's actually quite wonderful to hear them too. If you will allow me, because we're talking about this country, and we talked about the music of this country.
Mm-hmm.
I made a series of paintings related to the music of musicians of this country. And I did write a poem that's called The Man Who Sang Amanedis, that's dedicated to Anthony Dalgas. Anthony Diamantidis, called Dalgas, a singer from the 20s and 30s, born in Turkey, who was ethnically cleansed when there was the exchange of population 22-23, and whose voice was considered only second to Caruso. And it's just a short poem, but it's also about Greece. And it's called The Man Who Sang Amanedis. Amanedis are songs that basically have a couple of lines interjected by the word aman, which means alas, alas, alas. They're a song of nostalgia and sorrow. And he called himself Dalgas because Dalgas in Greek means passion. And dalga in Turk means wave. And he could modulate his voice like a wave. But he sang songs of sorrow. So in a super bright way, we're talking about a little before Duchamp, he lived by this verbal pun. And he was a very, very elegant man who sang in boats, he sang in bars, he sang in cafes. And he died in 1936. So we heard him first in Smyrna, songs in the mode of the Argosyrto, 15 syllables of epigrammatic character. He sang like, so they say, the bulbul sings. Keeper of the night, he sang in waves, mimicking the sound of the sea, there where the curls of the water tremble near the shore. No longer young, Dalgas was employed in boats, accompanied by a Ionian Estudiantina. In Greece, he loved Arghiro Nicolaou, mother of Anna. Così passò buona parte della vita. In 1941 in Athens, with the arrival of the German army, he began to dim and gradually fade in a city that was bleak and grim.
Alain Elkann interviews.